Hey everyone, and welcome back to Be Like Christ, talking about Acts chapter 23 in 5 minutes. As always, if you want this handout, you can download it for free in the link in the description below. They're like scraping concrete outside or something, I don't know, but hopefully we can make it through this video without too much background noise. When did the events of Acts chapter 23 specifically occur? Well, specifically is hard to say, but we can say approximately this was about 57 AD. As far as our characters, we have Paul. He's been in like the last 10 chapters as our main character. He's been going around the Mediterranean area, planting churches, strengthening churches. We have the Jewish council, who we were introduced to in the last chapter. They were known as the Sanhedrin, and these were Jewish civil and religious leaders who were enemies of Paul, the gospel, and Jesus. We have a guy named Claudius Lysias. This is actually the tribune who's mentioned in the last couple chapters. His name is given here, Claudius Lysias. He was watching over Paul during his arrest, keeping Paul safe from the Jews while trying to ascertain why he had caused an uproar in the city and what the Jews were so angry about. And then we have Paul's nephew. This is interesting. Paul is mentioned as having a sister, and she had a son. And Paul's nephew saves Paul from a murderous plot put together by some Jewish people. And then finally, Governor Felix, Antonius Felix. He was the Roman procurator, never sure how to pronounce that. He was the Roman procurator of Judea from 52 to 60 AD. As far as our map goes today, it's relatively simple where these events took place. The first part of this chapter happens in Jerusalem, where we left off in chapter 22, and then Paul, at the end of the chapter, is moved to the city of Caesarea, a little bit north up on the coast of the Mediterranean. And now for our outline. Verses 1 through 10 are our first section, Paul before the Jewish council. So chapter 23, as I mentioned, picks up just where chapter 22 left off. The Roman tribune, Claudius Lysias, brought Paul to the Jewish council to find out why they wanted him dead. So Paul stood before the council and he declared that he had lived in good conscience towards God, that his life as he understood it was in accordance to God's will. And Ananias, the high priest, commanded someone to hit Paul on the mouth for saying this. Paul knew that this council wasn't going to give him a fair trial. He also knew, because of his background as a Pharisee, that this council was made up of two different religious sects among the Jews, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And the two groups were strongly divided over the question of whether or not there was a resurrection from the dead, whether there was life after death. So he makes this comment that I think he intended to stir up some trouble. He says, quote, "It is with respect to the hope of the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial." So this caused a big internal argument amongst the members of the council. The Pharisees were all for it, the Sadducees were totally against it, and the disagreement actually is described as becoming violent, and the tribune ordered Paul to be taken out of the council because he realized that they weren't going to get anything done that day. The next section is just one verse, verse 11. God appears to Paul in a vision. So during the night, the Lord appeared to Paul and he told him not to worry. He told him that he would have the opportunity to preach and to testify about Jesus in Rome. So Paul knows then that he is going to make it out of Jerusalem, he's going to make it out of Judea, and he'll eventually get to go to Rome. He doesn't know how that's going to happen, but there's a promise in place. And then verses 12 through 22, the Jews take an oath to kill Paul. So about 40 Jews took an oath that they wouldn't eat or drink until Paul was dead. It's kind of a dangerous oath to take. They went to the Jewish council, who Paul just appeared before, and they asked them to summon Paul for additional questioning, as if they wanted to understand his case more fully. Right? So they wanted the council to ask the tribune to bring Paul down to them again. And these 40 Jews planned to ambush Paul on the way to the council and to kill him. But Paul's nephew overheard the plot, and he reported it to the Roman tribune. And the tribune believed the boy, and he told him to keep it a secret, not to tell anybody that he had reported it. Claudius Lysias, our tribune, takes swift action in our final section, verses 23 through 35. Paul is moved to Caesarea with a significant armed guard. So the tribune prepared 200 soldiers, 200 spearmen, 70 horsemen to transport Paul to the city of Caesarea where the governor was. He wrote a letter to Felix, the governor, explaining Paul's situation. He told Felix that he hadn't found any reason why Paul should be imprisoned, or certainly why he should be put to death, but he was sending him to Felix so that he could judge his case. So Paul was transported to Caesarea during the cover of night. And upon reading the letter and learning that Paul was a man from Cilicia, Felix told him that he would give him a trial when his accusers, the Jews from Jerusalem, arrived in Caesarea to testify against him. So that is Acts chapter 23. We'll pick up with Paul's trial in Acts chapter 24 next time. We're almost done. Now for our application. God is working in unseen ways that don't always appear miraculously. God promised Paul in verse 11 that he would have the opportunity to preach in Rome. And it was not luck that Paul's nephew overheard the Jews plot to murder his uncle. God providentially arranged the time, the place, the volume of the voices that were speaking their murderous intent, and he providentially arranged Paul's nephew to be there to overhear it all and to be able to report it. I certainly don't think it's by chance that the promise is given by God before the plot is discovered and thwarted. God has got all of this figured out even before human beings become aware of any of it. Paul's nephew might have just been out buying a loaf of bread or doing his ordinary daily chores. And that shows us that God can work through the mundane, through the ordinary events of a busy world to not only complete his larger will, but also to direct our individual lives. And that's the application for us, is God hasn't stopped working this way. He's still providentially working in the world in all kinds of subtle and unseen ways to direct us the way that we need to go. We maybe think that we're having the most ordinary day, and God could be doing the most extraordinary things